Bill Pickett, Rodeo King by Joe Pitkin. Page 3. If the job was tough, be it hot or cold, you could get it done if Bill was told. He'd fix the fence, or skin a cow, or ride a bronc, and even plow, or do anything if you told him how. Like many men in the old-time West, on any job he did his best. Page 4. Son of a Slave. Zach Miller, a wealthy Oklahoma rancher, wrote these lines for a poem about Bill Pickett. Pickett worked on Miller's land, the famous 101 Ranch. Pickett also starred as one of the greatest early rodeo performers, the most famous African-American cowboy of his time. Bill Pickett entertained thousands of people around the world, from ordinary folks to royalty. Bill Pickett was born on December 5th, 1870, in Travis County, Texas. His father, Thomas Jefferson Pickett, had been a slave until slavery ended in the United States in 1865. Both Thomas and his wife, Mary, had black, white, and Native American ancestors. Pickett, the oldest of 13 children, grew up near Austin. He was a bright student at the one-room school he attended. He learned to read and write, but he only went to school through the 5th grade. Since his family was very poor, Pickett had to go to work while still a boy to help earn money. Growing up in Texas, Pickett eagerly watched cowboys at work. He saw them drive herds of longhorn cattle along the dusty trail from Austin to Kansas stockyards. Spellbound, he listened to his older cousins' stories about their adventures on cattle drives. At that time, cattle didn't graze with one fenced-in ranch area. Page 5. The country had grown so large that when it was time to take them to the cattle market, the cows had to be rounded up from the west and herded to a stockyard in the east or to a railway that could take them there. The cattle drive usually lasted a month and covered 2,000 miles. The cowboys had to look out for Indians and rustlers and find pastures along the way. When Pickett left school, he decided to become a ranch hand. He learned how to ride horses and throw a lasso. He even learned how to tame a wild Mustang. Strong and agile, he could think quickly and move fast. He knew a lot about horses and could predict how they would behave. Page 6. One day, young Bill saw a rancher using dogs to round up some stray cattle. The dogs were part bulldog, a breed that is known for biting and hanging on no matter what. The dogs used a special technique to subdue the cows. When they caught up with one, they leaped up and grabbed onto its upper lip with their teeth. Since this lip is very sensitive, the cow came to a shuddering stop and didn't move. The rancher could then take his time roping it. This method of catching cattle was called bulldogging. While he was a ranch hand, Pickett developed all the skills a cowboy needed. He also experimented with new ways to handle livestock. One day, Pickett helped a group of cowboys brand some ornery calves. He told them he could quiet any calf. The cowboys laughed at him but agreed to let him try. He used the bite 'em style he had learned from the rancher's dogs. To the cowboys' amazement, Pickett managed to quiet the frisky calves. He later used this technique when he performed in rodeos and shows. Page 7. In the late 1880s, Pickett moved to Taylor, Texas. A local rancher hired him to feed and work his cattle. Now and for nearly the rest of his life, Pickett was officially a cowboy. He would have plenty of chances to perfect his bulldogging technique. The work of a cowboy was backbreaking, day in and day out. Pickett labored long hours. During a busy week, he might put in 80 hours of hard work, yet he only earned $5 a week in pay. But Pickett was young and he had energy to burn. On weekends, he entered rodeos. He rode in bucking bronco contests to have fun and win some extra spending money. But he also found that he loved performing in front of a cheering crowd. Page 8. Riding the rodeo circuit. Pickett married a woman named Maggie Turner in 1890. The couple eventually had 7 daughters. They also had 2 sons who died as babies. As a young family, the Picketts worked hard, but they didn't have much money. What little they had was threatened suddenly when Pickett was just 30 years old. Suddenly, for no apparent reason, Bill Pickett lost his sight. No one ever figured out the cause. With 7 children to feed, Bill and Maggie Pickett felt desperate. Then, just as suddenly, 11 months later, Pickett was able to see again. To support his growing family, Pickett went into business with his brothers. They formed the Pickett Brothers Bronco Busters and Rough Riders. Their advertising notices promised to ride and break all wild horses with much care. Catching and taming wild cattle a specialty. For a little extra money, Pickett continued to compete in local rodeos. Everyone who saw him perform admired his ability to ride a bucking horse. But Pickett soon became known far and wide for a new skill. He decided to demonstrate his bulldogging ability in the rodeo ring. His talent to wrestle steer was so impressive that other young cowboys were eager to try it. Today, bulldogging is a standard rodeo event. Page 9. Hardly a large man, Pickett was only 5 feet, 7 inches tall. He weighed just 145 pounds, but he learned to throw an angry 1,000-pound steer to the ground. Pickett said, "I can lift a 200-pound bag of salt over my head with one movement. People tell me that's pretty strong." Pickett became a favorite rodeo attraction in the Texas region. Yet he encountered prejudice. African American cowboys were not allowed to compete in many rodeo contests, so Pickett used a clever nickname. He advertised himself as the Dusky. Page 10. Ride 'em, cowboy. Despite his small size, Pickett could pull a steer down to the ground with his large hands and powerful arms and shoulders. Sometimes he used his special bite 'em style to gain better control of the animal. Later, Pickett stopped using his biting technique because it caused the steers pain. News of Pickett's daring spread like wildfire across a dry prairie. Huge audiences came to watch him perform. Soon, Pickett was invited to perform in rodeos in the American West, Canada, and Mexico. When Pickett bulldogged, he risked being injured or killed by a steer's sharp horns and kicking hooves. He often suffered bruises, scrapes, cuts, and muscle aches. Sometimes he also suffered more serious injuries such as sprains and broken bones. His wife begged him to quit. They argued about it, but Pickett loved to perform. For the excitement of the rodeo, he was willing to put up with the heat, the dirt, and even the danger. Page 12. One time, Pickett was performing in a rodeo in New York City's Madison Square Garden. The cowboy helping him, called a hazer, was Will Rogers, who became a famous humorist. Rogers' job was to keep the bull running in a straight line, but bulls can be unpredictable. That night, the bull charged out of the chute, raced across the arena, and crashed over the fence. The spectators scattered, screaming. The bull thundered on, running straight up the arena steps. Pickett spurred his horse and followed him, leaping over the fence and clattering up the steps. Will Rogers was right behind him. Catching up with the frightened bull, Pickett jumped off his horse. He gripped the horns while Rogers lassoed the bull's hind legs. Slowly, the two men pulled the bull back down the steps and into the arena. Newspapers trumpeted the dramatic adventure, and the show played to sold-out crowds for the rest of its stay in New York. Before long, Bill Pickett's feats sparked the interest of Zach, Joe, and George Miller. The Miller brothers owned a sprawling ranch in Oklahoma. They also managed one of the biggest Wild West shows in the country. Page 13. Home, Home on the Ranch. The Millers' 101 Ranch Wild West show was very popular. This traveling show combined displays of rodeo skills with staged entertainment. The show featured music, dancing, and acts such as dramatic recreations of the Pony Express and a stagecoach robbery. Hundreds of cowboys, cowgirls, and Native Americans took part. In 1907, the Millers hired Pickett to tour with their show. With his flashy style, Pickett soon became one of the show's stars. Fellow 101 Ranch cowboy Milt Hinkle said, "Every time Pickett busted a steer to the ground, the crowd stood up on their hind legs and cheered." Pickett moved his family to the 101 Ranch, the same year he joined the Millers' show. For a while, the Picketts lived in two large tents. They cooked and ate in one tent and slept in the other. But there was no school on the ranch for the Pickett's daughters. So the family moved a few miles away to a house in Ponca City, Oklahoma. At that time, only 6 African American families lived there. Black children were not allowed to go to school with white children, so the town set up a special school for them. Page 14. The Miller Brothers show traveled throughout the Midwest, thrilling audiences wherever it went. Pickett's steer wrestling was always a highlight of the show. What audiences loved most was Pickett's showmanship and courage. With his bright red shirt and tall boots, he dazzled the crowds. He risked his life every time he wrestled a steer. To make his act more thrilling, he sometimes tied his hands behind his back or wore one arm in a sling. Supposedly, he even bulldogged an elk. Throughout his years with the 101 Ranch Wild West show, Pickett's fame grew. In time, Pickett even appeared in movies. He starred in a silent film called The Bulldogger. Although he never became a movie star, as one of his 101 Ranch friends did, he was one of the first African Americans in a motion picture. Page 15. Down Yonder in Mexico. In 1908, the 101 Ranch Wild West show traveled to Mexico. In preparing for the Mexican tour, the Millers made a serious mistake. They didn't realize that Mexicans love bullfights, but not rodeos. What's more, they held bulls in the highest esteem as a worthy opponent in the arena, and they disapproved of the way the Americans, Bill especially, fought and subdued the bull. They even insisted that Pickett was not as graceful or dignified as a real bullfighter. Joe Miller responded to this taunt by saying that a bullfighter could never bulldog a bull the way Pickett could. Bragging about his star, Miller foolishly declared that Pickett could stay on a Mexican bull for at least 5 minutes. The Mexicans agreed to pay Miller 5,000 pesos if Pickett was successful. If Pickett lost, the bull ring would pay for his funeral. Pickett accepted the challenge. On December 23rd, crowds filled El Toro, a brand new stadium in Mexico City. The audience included Mexico's president, Porfirio Diaz. While officials worked out last-minute details, fans milled anxiously. It was late afternoon when Pickett finally galloped into the ring. He wore a red shirt, jeans, boots, and a cowboy hat. The Mexican crowd booed loudly. They believed the Americans had insulted their national sport of bullfighting and wanted desperately to see Miller and his men humbled. Page 16. The crowd was cheering, "Viva el Toro" and "Muerte al Negro de Oklahoma," or "Long live the bull" and "Death to the Negro of Oklahoma." With these cries in his ears, Pickett bravely faced a fierce bull named Little Bean. Little Bean was well known for its ferocity. Knowing how dangerous this challenge would be, Pickett asked the Millers to make a promise. If Pickett died in the ring, they would have to bring his body home to the 101, to bury in the land he loved best. From the start, Little Bean lived up to his reputation. As the bull charged, 4 cowboys tried to keep the bull running in a straight line, but Little Bean was too quick for them. Pickett drove his favorite horse Spradley alongside the bull. He was afraid to get too close for fear that Spradley might get gored, but he needed to get close enough to the bull to jump on its back. Hating to bring Spradley into danger, Pickett pulled up in close range to the bull and allowed it to attack once again. Page 17. Little Bean did, and Pickett felt Spradley shudder as the bull gored the horse's hindquarters. Enraged, Pickett slid off his horse and onto the bull's back. Little Bean tossed his head from side to side. He tried to smash Pickett against the walls of the ring, but somehow Pickett stayed on the thrashing animal for more than 7 minutes. He said, "If I had gotten the kind of hold I usually get, I would have stayed with that bull until he starved to death." Later, Pickett found that he had received 3 broken ribs in this battle with Little Bean and other serious bruises and cuts. The stunned audience became angry. Upset by Pickett's success, they reacted with rage. They hurled stones, sticks, fruits, and seat cushions into the arena. In a near riot, the Mexican president called out a special police guard to protect the Americans. Pickett's first concern wasn't his own injuries. He turned to his horse's wounds. Spradley was a favorite stallion. Long ago, Pickett had nursed him back to health after the horse had almost died. This time, an elderly Mexican saved Spradley's life. The man treated the quivering horse's wounds with red bananas. He peeled 2 of the bananas and pushed them deep into the wounds. This folk cure stopped the bleeding. In a few days, Spradley healed completely. Because of his injuries, Pickett did not perform again for almost a year. When he recovered, he went back on tour. After such a beating, that took guts. Page 18. On the road again. In 1910, Pickett returned to the 101 Ranch Wild West show. He was a star, but he didn't act like one. He slept in the sleeper car of a train with the other performers. He ate in the cook tent, and he still earned only $12 a week. When he wasn't on tour, Pickett lived at the 101 Ranch with his family. He broke wild horses, took care of the ranch's buffalo herd, and trained other cowboys. He tried his hand at other jobs too. He worked in a stockyard and in a mill. But being a cowboy was in his blood. Zach Miller, who knew cowboys well, said Pickett was the greatest sweet and dirt cowhand that ever lived, bar none. In 1913, the 101 Ranch Wild West show sailed to South America. The show toured Argentina. To the delight of the crowds, Pickett wrestled steers while dressed like a gaucho, an Argentine cowboy. Pickett greatly enjoyed his South American trip. He was treated with respect and admiration by the crowds. Because he spoke some Spanish, he also felt at ease in that land. He appreciated the fine hospitality of the people, and he enjoyed the food too. Argentina was famous for its wonderful beef. Pickett loved to eat at outdoor restaurants where steaks were broiled over open fires. Page 20. Pickett even traveled to England with the Millers' show. He performed for King George V and Queen Mary. King George was so thrilled by one of the acts that he forgot himself and actually began clapping in the midst of a performance, a very unkingly action. The Queen slapped the King's hands, correcting this less-than-regal behavior. Pickett did not use his bulldogging style in England. Even so, English animal lovers were upset by his steer wrestling because they thought it was cruel. The police even arrested Pickett and fined him. The Millers were thrilled by the publicity that resulted and tried to arrange to have Pickett fined every week. Page 21. British royalty entertained Pickett and the other cowboys. Pickett rode in a yellow limousine and dined at the country estate of an earl. He entertained the dinner guests with tales of his adventures. After their success in England, the Millers also planned a tour of Europe. But then World War I broke out. The British government confiscated much of the 101 Ranch Wild West show's livestock and equipment, arguing that they needed it for the war effort. Pickett and his fellow performers returned home. The 101 Ranch Wild West show would never recover from this blow. Page 22. The End of the Trail. During 40 years as a rodeo star, Pickett risked injury and death almost every time he performed. He had broken or cracked nearly every bone in his body. After bulldogging about 5,000 steers and traveling thousands of miles, he figured it was time to hang up his spurs and retire. Pickett stopped competing in rodeos and performing in the 1920s, but he kept working as a cowboy on the 101 Ranch. Even when the Miller brothers ran into financial troubles during the Great Depression, they could count on Bill. One day, in the spring of 1932, Pickett was breaking in a wild horse. The horse kicked Pickett in the head. Pickett remained in a coma for 2 weeks but never recovered. On April 2nd, he died from his injuries. Pickett's friend Will Rogers, the famous cowboy performer and humorist, announced Pickett's funeral on the radio. Rogers said, "Bill Pickett never had an enemy. Even the steers wouldn't hurt old Bill." More than 200 people attended Pickett's funeral. Page 23. Almost 40 years after his death, Pickett's role as a rodeo pioneer was officially recognized. In 1971, Pickett became the first African-American cowboy in the National Rodeo Cowboy Hall of Fame. In 1994, the United States Postal Service issued a special stamp to honor Pickett. He shared the honor with other legends of the Wild West, such as Buffalo Bill and Sacagawea. Page 24. There's a remarkable story about this stamp. When Pickett's great-grandson looked closely at the stamp, he realized that the man pictured on it wasn't Bill Pickett. It was Bill's brother's Ben. The Postal Service had to reprint the stamps. Bill Pickett's heroics made him famous, but the way he lived his life every day, his hard work, and his respect for others made him beloved. On the day Pickett died, Zach Miller wrote a short poem in honor of his friend. He left a blank that's hard to fill, for there'll never be another Bill. The end.